At FIE, we're not just
students
and faculty.
We're not only learners
and lecturers.
We are expanding minds,
expanding futures.
We're redefining the classroom.
We are life-changing.
Eye-opening. We are a community
driven by our values
that wants you.
You.
Yes, you.
To join.
Hello and welcome to In the Field, a podcast from FIE, where we will be exploring all things study abroad. I'm Dr. Heidi James Dunbar, writer in residence and senior faculty, and I will be your host. Joining me today is Brian Ridgers. Brian completed his MA and PhD at the University of London. Brian has taught American study abroad students for over 15 years, teaching courses in British life and cultures, travel writing, Shakespeare and Elizabethan literature, modern drama and performance, as well as creative writing. He has also taught at Queen Mary's College at the University of London, St Mary's University and at Plymouth University. His interests include Shakespeare and contemporary performance, biography and literature, women's writing in the 19th century, as well as psychoanalytic critical theory. The courses he teaches offer students the chance to explore London as a city, as well as an introduction to critical thinking about performance, history and cultural texts by applying a range of critical perspectives, including gender, psychoanalytic, post-colonial and new historicist analysis. In his work for FIE, Brian has sought to establish a dialogue with students to hear their views and reactions to the city around them, as well as different ideas and voices. Hi, Brian. It's really good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Hi, Heidi. Thanks very much.
I've just introduced you, and there's something you say in your bio that's really intriguing that I'd love to ask a little bit more about, which is how London, the city, is almost like another text in your classes, and it becomes a part of your dialogue with students. I'd love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. Well, we're so lucky to have it on our doorstep at FIE. So what I try to do with my Shakespeare class is to take them out for quite a few trips, sometimes 3 or 4 trips, depending on the weather. And I feel fairly strongly that there are echoes and fragments of what Shakespeare and his contemporaries were doing in London. There are places that we know he went and stayed and performed and wrote. But those are really just fragments that we can kind of find at a distance. There's nothing concrete or material there. So the idea of going down and seeing those sites and thinking about them creatively and historically is a big part of what we do, but also to understand that they belong there, but they don't really exist there anymore, that they are part of the flow of London and the flow of history. So for us, Shakespeare, in the classes that I teach and collaborate with my students, I feel like it's a collaboration. We go down and we explore and we think about those places as both here, but also very much in the past. And we're thinking about, for example, how Bankside, where Shakespeare did most of his work after 1599, has changed utterly since even in the last 20 years has changed. And it's full of people. The minute the sun comes out, the minute the globe opens, it's full of people flowing along. And in a way, we play with that idea of it being full of people and full of audience. And very much that idea of asking questions about places and very much asking questions about history. That's what we do. We do that outside. Very much the experience I have with Shakespeare in teaching FIE students and talking with them and hearing them is that we do things rather than just listen or watch. We're doing. It's, for me, has become very recently in the last 2 years, very active in terms of classroom and out of classroom.
I'm really intrigued by what you mean by the collaboration. Can you tell me more about collaborating with students? Because that sounds fantastic.
It's great fun. And one of the barriers to teaching Shakespeare is Shakespeare himself in terms of text and school. And this is not to criticize school teaching at all, because I feel it's really important to have a Shakespeare text under your belt. But I teach students who are from all areas academically. And so sometimes those students might be majors in sports or in PR, or I even spoke to and talked to a student who was doing fashion design. Actually, that came in really handy when thinking about fashion and performance and costume, and that was amazing. So what I don't do and can't do is assume that there's any prior knowledge beyond maybe high school Shakespeare. So that sense of collaboration is meeting them on their own terms and saying to them, whatever engagement you have in Shakespeare, it's fine. And it kind of inviting them in to break up the text a little bit, to think about performance, and to think about my Shakespeare, which sounds as corny as anything, but I think you've got to kind of engage with what I'm thinking, and what they're thinking is completely different at various points. But that's great, because then we can have a dialogue. And we do that with the plays themselves, with the ideas around the plays, very much thinking about now, not thinking about 1602, 1599, or whatever dates we have in the past. Yes, we do some history, and that can be great fun. But really, it's about performance now, reading those texts now, and watching together and stopping and saying, what do you think is happening here? Can you read the face of this actor and tell me what you think and what the students think? Each of them, but also in terms of their own collaboration with each other, becomes a really important way for us in the classes to think about meaning, because a meaning in a Shakespeare play is never fixed, as in any work of literature. I'm sure you'd agree. No author is saying, great, that's done, that's the way to read this. It's really something that is ongoing. We change our text very frequently, but I come back to Macbeth quite a lot because it's quite a dark play, open to a lot of interpretations. And when we often have lovely evening classes, and Macbeth sits nicely in an evening class. You sit and you read a little bit, but you watch, and we're interested in watching different versions. So last semester, we watched Patrick Stewart deliver a monologue, a soliloquy, and then we watched Anthony Sher and Harriet Walter play out a scene. And they were so distinctly different in terms of acting styles and approaches. It was almost like we were looking at two different authors, and definitely two very different directors, Gregory Doran and Rupert Gould. And, we're really looking at different approaches. And the exciting thing for me was the students were really picking up and really responding to those approaches. So a lot of what we do is collaboration, because if I give a lecture, obviously I do give short lectures, but if I give a long lecture, that's not the plan. The plan is to say, what do you think? And what's your reaction now at this moment to this performance?
Yeah, I think we all learn better that way. I mean, like you say, given the information we need, but being able to then really unpick it, understand it, explore it together. That's so exciting.
Oh, it's been great fun. I mean, obviously, it's not all there. It grows. I mean, the beginning of each course is really, people get quite quiet, but also we're really lucky to have students who are very much interested in being here. That's, again, going back to London. When we're going to London as a kind of text, sometimes I'm saying things like, well, look, here's a great restaurant, next to a great theatre. But also, I think when you go to somewhere and you see that place, you get a sense of feeling about that place. You get a kind of a real sense that, for example, the modern globe is down by the river, and that sense of being down by the river changes the way you think about that space. I think it's hard to talk about that, and you can't tell students you will go and experience this, but to go down there together and to walk, we tend to walk quite slowly as well. We're not rushing around. And most importantly, I don't overburden them with facts and say, here are the 10 facts. It's more, look, here's what this place is, and here's what this place was. And let's just think about that a little bit. And that becomes something that reflects on our classroom activity. That grows a bit as the course develops. And that can be really exciting, I think.
Yeah, that's truly experiential, isn't it?
I mean, I try to make it as experiential as possible, but you can't plan for that. It's got to have a little bit of fluidity. It's a bit organic, often we do see plays in this class, and that's a really important part of what we do. Sometimes the plays don't quite work, and that can be quite almost exciting because we can work out why it didn't work. Shakespeare isn't a perfect genius example of theatre. Theatre is very fluid. Theatre is also something that can happen at different ways at different times. And so, though we're really anxious to see good performances, we saw a Julius Caesar that wasn't so good, but we enjoyed it not being so good. And actually, the discussion really flowed about how that could have changed, what mistakes were made, and also to emphasize what worked. And that was something that really allowed us to collaborate. Because once you see a play, I can't see a play any better than a student of mine can see a play. We're both there. Our experiences are both incredibly valid. We both have our opinions on what's happening. And that dialogue that we have, not individually, but as a group, becomes really, really important. Because then we can see a little bit more of the experience of being together. You know, that phrase, being in the room, we're in the room together. And that is a kind of really exciting thing. I mean, to go to a play and see a play from 400 years ago and watch a play that might be really funny or quite sad, and to feel those emotions coming out now with actors who are very much there in 2025. They're very modern actors of different genders, different ethnicities, and seeing that on the stage, the Globe does that really well, I have to say. And that's something that we really enjoy doing. I'm going to say we enjoy doing, and I can presume that from my students because I see the reaction.
Yeah. I think that's a safe presumption. Now I know this is a bit of a cheesy question, but I think it's important. Why do you think Shakespeare is still relevant today? Because he clearly is. Like you say, there was a recent remake of Macbeth with one of the Coen brothers, right? And he's constantly being re-examined, re-explored. So why is that, do you think?
Absolutely. And let me just say, as an example, to move into the answer, which is that Coen brothers movie is amazing because Denzel Washington plays Macbeth. Catherine Hunter plays all of the witches. Frances McDormand is, we just watched this, is why the names are in my head. Frances McDormand is a Lady Macbeth who's different from other Lady Macbeths. I want to say Catherine Hunter is a very, very famous, very present fringe theatre actor. And I mean that in a really positive way. I love fringe theatre. She's an experimental pan-European actor who possibly towards the end of her career, she just played, I think about 2 years ago, King Lear at the Globe. So even seeing Catherine Hunter next to Denzel Washington, although they're never on the screen at the same, well, they are on the screen at the same time, but they don't feel like they're ever present. That's an example of how I think we come to Shakespeare as an author, as a playwright who is very much about now. And I think that's not the traditional super English Shakespeare we're talking about, although that is an interesting thing to study. Shakespeare, I think of him metaphorically as a place that we visit, and it's what we collectively, different cultures, bring to Shakespeare. So it's a meeting place. He is a meeting place in that sense. Almost every culture that I've encountered has some engagement with him. And it doesn't mean that he's the best and the only author, but it does mean that we've shared something culturally. And in terms of performance, that changes in almost every time a play is put on, that changes. So, for example, Emma Rice's work at the Globe Theatre, which is a few years ago now, but is really exciting and very, very different. And going to see plays that she directed is like seeing a new writer because she breaks up Shakespeare and puts him back together. So I feel like that sense of us going to either a play or reading a text, but not necessarily having Shakespeare as a fixed author is really important.
Do you think it's something about what he tells us about humanity as well that makes him so relevant?
Absolutely. And I would say that idea, for example, the paradox of thinking about women characters, we know that he didn't officially work with a woman who was acting. He didn't work with an actress ever in his career, although I think there's some hints recently that there may have been some private performances where he worked with actresses, but it's very hard to know. But absolutely, I don't think emotions are universally fixed. But I do think that his words are very, very deeply ingrained and linked to emotional narratives. But I do feel that we've got Shakespeare's text and then we've got performance, and everything is about an adaptation of the text. And the text isn't really fixed. We don't talk about this too much because it can be so confusing. But the folio quarter, a lot of work's been done, great work on the folio, but I don't overburden the students with that because I feel we need something that's fixed. So let's agree the text is fixed. We then have adaptation and interpretation and emotions then that come out, the idea of different moments in, let's say, Hamlet's life or Ophelia's or Macbeth's or, let's say, Lady Macbeth. And again, we've got, I think, female characters relating to male characters in terms of coercion and violence and love and romance. Those things are not going to go away. They are going to be a little bit different in the 21st century. And most performances in Stratford and in London and elsewhere are really, really trying to engage with that, because of course we change as audiences in terms of how we may have if we were in a theatre 100 years ago. And I really like that idea of seeing emotions portrayed on the stage, reaching out to the audience. And the audience is, again, to use this word, a little bit in collaboration. The Globe is a great place for that because they can see you react. And often they're kind of trying to get a reaction from you, or certainly working out your reaction and responding to it, sometimes quite literally, rarely, but sometimes quite literally. But I think that relevance is absolutely there, not just because of Shakespeare, but because of high school. We've all come and engaged with him in some way, but also because we've brought him in to our lives, but our cultural experiences. What I'd love is to have more writers who surrounded Shakespeare at present, because he was never alone. He was always himself collaborating with other writers, with also practitioners. But we rarely see Ben Jonson's work or Christopher Marlowe. But sometimes they're on in London, sometimes they're on and we go and see them. Sometimes that doesn't quite work. Sometimes it really works. We've seen a couple of brilliant Dr. Faustus productions over the years that have really spoken to us and really made us kind of laugh and gasp. And that's been really exciting, you know.
Yeah. I love it. What do you think Shakespeare tells us about the UK? And I know this is a tricky question because it's almost like we've grown into his image as well as, but, you know, tell me something about what you think about that.
Well, I think about the UK and Shakespeare in a really, for me, this is really exciting. I think of him in terms of carnival of old England, and I don't mean a kind of industrial Victorian England, and I don't mean an England of the Roman Empire. I mean a cultural version that stands outside of middle class and working class and peasants, something that speaks to, you know, the more, to be cliched, Stonehenge version of Englishness. An Englishness that is about family and place. So a play like As You Like It and Twelfth Night, or maybe The Comedy of Errors, celebrating a very crazy sense of humor, a sense of humor that sometimes is just absolutely bonkers, and a real sense of absurdity. I think there's a lot of absurdity in Shakespeare's comedy. And I think that sense of Englishness, as he drew on it, thinks about ritual and reversal, thinks about Mardi Gras, things that were very English 400 years ago, and now actually, ironically, a little bit more American than they are English. Pancake Tuesday is not a great thing here. We have a pancake, but Mardi Gras can be in the States, a real celebration of difference, diversity, and celebrating strangeness. I'm also interested in standing back and looking at Shakespeare as a kind of English cultural icon, not trusting it, but not really totally undermining it, but seeing it for what it is, which is if you quote a bit of Latin or Shakespeare, people will assume you're super clever and you're kind of a very Oxford or Cambridge person, not against those universities, but it's interesting to see the cultural authority he still has. And I want to just stand back and see that and show the students, look, no one in the Globe Theatre or other London theatres, the Bridge, for example, is about to come back with a brilliant kind of dirty, but I don't mean that sexually, a really beautifully dirty Midsummer Night's Dream, which is promenade as well as seated, and I'm really looking forward to going to see it again. So that's an English Shakespeare now. But I once went to the Barbican with the group to watch Henry IV Part 1, I think. And Anthony shared with Falstaff, he was brilliant. But people were there in their dinner jackets. They kind of had their really expensive tickets. And we were there. We weren't dressed up, but we weren't scruffy. But there was such a difference in the audiences. And we were kind of laughing a little bit at the Falstaff jokes. And I got a sense that a lot of the audience were coming to see something they knew was important. Some of them weren't quite sure why, maybe. I don't mean to be critical of those people, but it was interesting that they were really trying to see something they'd been told, this is good, this is important. And I feel like those differences are something that are really interesting to see and just to show the students, look, seems to be right the way up here. But actually, I don't think he'd recognize himself in quite that way if he was here now.
No, absolutely. He'd be, I think, absolutely baffled that he's been co-opted into high culture and this kind of soft power. Yeah, I'm waiting for people, sausage chewing, tomato throwing, beer swilling masses.
I mean, he did write for the Queen and also King James, but at the same time, I think he was very aware that he didn't belong in that sense. I don't think anybody would have thought that if you write for somebody in that way that you belong with them. But I agree. I think the messiness, and I mean that in a really positive way, of his audience is something he clearly celebrated and clearly worked with. I mean, he knew his audience really well. And I'm really interested to show the students those versions of Englishness that they may have encountered. I mean, we know the monarchy is still very, very present in the 21st century, but to show students the ways and kind of share with them the fact that I don't feel I belong to that culture, that kind of Glyndebourne-y opera culture, which is great. It's all there. But most people don't really engage with that. The other thing I love about the Globe Theatre particularly is how many young people go there to go and essentially watch a play, because you can stand and it's a very affordable ticket. I think it's £5 to £10, and very easily you don't have to pre-book that much during the summer and the spring. So that idea of people coming to encounter a bit of theatre, but not necessarily having to dress up, excuse me, or to have to make a really big effort culturally. They could just come along, and to see groups of younger people doing that. This doesn't sound patronizing, but I give you an example of a non-FIE group I took to Stratford, 16 to 18-year-olds last summer, to watch The Merry Wives of Windsor. And we got slightly told off for laughing too much, which is a great badge of honor. It was a brilliant, very funny production. And they kind of turned around and said, do you think you could laugh a bit less? And I kind of smiled and said, I think this is great. We're laughing. We'll try and keep it down, but I don't think it's going to happen. It wasn't nasty, by the way, but it was so fascinating.
I find that's incredible. I mean, I thought it's really interesting what you're saying about, people, or in that Shakespeare has been co-opted to imply an Oxbridge education, but we're all quoting Shakespeare all the time because so much of so much of our everyday idiomatic language is. I always find that so fascinating.
I think that's also a brilliant point, because we don't quite realize how much he's been kind of brought into the language, was kind of Dr. Johnson onwards, I mean, that's another thing we touch upon, but we don't go into a really big way, but we touch upon how Shakespeare became Shakespeare. How did this cultural icon emerge from the man who was not quite thinking in that way? As you said, he would be so surprised if he arrived now. I think he'd be really happy that he could kind of monetize all this, because he wasn't very interested in making money. And I don't mean that in a negative way. But I also think, well, the other thing that's fascinating about Shakespeare is he's shifting all the time. So there's just in the last week, an article has been published in one of the academic journals and put into the press, that there's a letter, a plausible letter, that says Mr. and Mrs. Shakespeare lived in London. And there's been a history going back, 300 years, that Mrs. Shakespeare, always referred to as Anne Hathaway, which makes me smile, that Mrs. Shakespeare lived in Stratford and she didn't live with him in London. And I think we're all going to have to hopefully rethink that idea of him as the lone genius away from his wife. That's going to be fascinating. And that just shows how much the fixed idea of, let's say, Glyndebourne, Oxford Shakespeare, however we might want to call him, the official Shakespeare is always being switched around. And I think that's something I absolutely love. It fascinates me.
Absolutely. It's really interesting you say that, because it's almost like it reflects how we see the biography when there's so little truly known. What we impose on someone's biography shows a great deal about what's important in our own culture. So this idea, the lone male, unencumbered by domesticity, is a genius. It's that kind of Cyril Collery.
Absolutely. And the idea that he's quite middle class, that he's very hard working, but he's also making a bit of money. But also what's important about him is he goes home to be with his family and dies in Stratford. And it feels like that there are other playwrights in the period, Christopher Marlowe being an example, who led a very different kind of life and died violently. And I do think that did really reflect upon the way his reputation in terms of Englishness. I mean, you don't think of Christopher Marlowe as an English kind of icon in any way, because was a gay man who was a spy who died violently, and those things are not, of course, the violence isn't going to be validated. One would hope his sexuality was largely irrelevant, but that idea of him not being an icon and Shakespeare being an icon, I can't help thinking that's a lot to do with his plays being published collaboratively by him and a group of other people. We assume he was involved, but also, he's kind of safe as a person, Jermaine Greer wrote a brilliant book about Shakespeare's wife that I don't think needs changing now, even with this new evidence. But I think that's just so important to think that he was influenced and supported by his daughter, Susanna, his wife, and I'm sure if he was talking to us, he would be thinking about those people around him who allowed him and supported him, allowed him to be the writer he was. The Stratford archaeologists and historians are really keen to say they think that New Place, his house in Stratford, was a place of writing and family. Now, we don't know this, but it is something that I really like to think about, And then London, ? Maybe she's there with him. I really hope she is. I think that's great, though.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. But I really do love the fact that we use so much Shakespeare in our everyday language, like wearing your heart on your sleeve, or,
in my mind's eye, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And we don't really know we know where it's from, but when we say it, our language doesn't think, oh, that's a quote from somebody. We've kind of totally, internalized it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just part of our language now.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no greater honor than that, actually, to be honest with you, is there?
No, absolutely. I'm loving chatting with you, but I realise you have all sorts of other things to do, including prepping for classes and things. So I'm going to ask you, could you share your city secret with us?
Yes, I've got 3, but I'll only talk about one. But I'm going to say the river, the Thames, is the biggest, not a secret, of course, but the Thames. Primrose Hill up in North London is so beautiful. But I think the secret I've chosen is down in Richmond upon Thames at the end of the District line. People are beginning to go down there a lot more because of the Ted Lasso pub and the TV series. But if you walk along the river a little bit, you come to Hollyhock's Cafe up in the park. It looks like a little hobbit house. It's a lovely cafe. It's, I think, mostly vegan. Some of the times it's vegan, but it doesn't matter whether it's not vegan or not. It's so lovely. And it's a place to sit, and there's squirrels and sometimes crows come and sit with you. And it's just the most lovely place. And I sometimes go with groups down there once or twice with Shakespeare students, although there's no real reason to go down there, but we kind of go and chat a bit of Shakespeare. And I cycle down there a little bit in the summer too, and I definitely recommend it. Hollyhock's Cafe. You can look it up, and it's a great place to go. And I really like it. I don't go there as often as I wish, but I really like going there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for talking to me.
Thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed our podcast. To learn more about our faculty, courses and programmes, visit our website, www.fie.org.uk. And if you have enjoyed this episode, check out our others wherever you listen. FIE provides life-changing study abroad experience in the UK, Ireland and Spain. As a non-profit educational organisation, we are passionately invested in making a difference for our students as the future global leaders of tomorrow and the field of international education as a whole. The FIE podcast is a creative and academic space for exploring everything, the people, the places and opportunities that make your experience so valuable and exciting.
FIE. We're here to help you
Unlock a wider
brighter future.